So if I start recording now, and
I'll say that.
I put it, it keeps it.
Okay.
Did you hit the go button?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. We're on chapter 5, section 4. This section is about Russia. Now, the first note we have on here is about Ivan the Terrible. And Ivan was the first Russian czar. He took on the term czar. Ivan was very terrible. He was so terrible that he killed his own son in a fit of rage and anger. But he was also the first to really start to advance Russia. Now, when we have some up here that says struggles for power with the boyars. These were the nobility. Okay, so these were the guys who owned the land. But keep in mind, Russia was a very backward country. Follow me, Gooch. Russia was a very backward country. The boyars had a tremendous amount of power. Those were the guys who owned the land. And everybody who lived on their land belonged to them as serfs. So they were close to being slaves. Okay? All right, so they had a lot of power. But remember, this was a time of absolute rule. Okay? This was a time of absolute rule. So Ivan was an absolute ruler. Remember our essential question. What were the causes and effects of absolutism in Europe? Okay, we're going over all these. This is Russia. All right, so Ivan became the absolute ruler. All right, the word czar means Caesar. Okay, so these there's a lot of historical stuff there. They thought they were descendants of the old Roman Empire. All right, now Ivan the Terrible. He had some good years early on, advanced the empire. His wife died. He blamed it on the boyars. He thought they poisoned his wife. So after that, he started going around trying to kill them. Okay? So Ivan turned against the boyars, and he starts killing them. Now, he killed them by having a secret police. The Russians have always been very good at having a secret police that goes around killing people. A lot of countries have, but the Russians have always been better at everybody else. Okay? Even when they were the Soviet Union, they had the KGB. All right. So, and this was Ivan's bad period. They call it Ivan's bad period. All right. Now, after Ivan died, there was a very weak ruler. In fact, it was such a weak ruler that there was a time. It was called a time of troubles because there wasn't much central authority. The authority was the local people, the boyars, and that's not real good for stability. All right. Now, in 1613, you can make a note that Michael Romanov became the Tsar. Now, it's hard for us sometimes to understand how kings get to become kings, but in a lot of ways, they get appointed. This guy got appointed as king. All the powerful boyars got together, and they said, look, we really need a king. You know, if we're going to have any kind of stability, we need somebody to be a king. And Mike sounds like a good guy. He works hard. You know, he comes from the Romanov family, long line of boyars. Let's make him the king or the czar. And he said, sure. And they offered him the job, and he said, okay, I'll take it. All right, so he became the czar of the Romanov family, ruled Russia up until the Russian Revolution. Okay? And we'll talk about that much later. Now, the greatest czar was Peter. He was the greatest. He was so great they called him Peter the Great. He was very tall, also a very, very large figure. Okay, he became a czar in 1696. People, keep in mind, Russia has always been very backward. They were always at least 100 years behind the rest of Europe in culture, technology, governing, all these things. They were basically the last country to give up serfdom, which is like slavery. They could even sell their serfs. Okay? They'd been occupied by Mongols up until the time of Ivan, so they were just very backward. When the rest of Europe was using plows and steel plows, they still had people out there physically with hoes. So they were behind agriculturally, they were behind culturally, politically, all of this. Okay? So what Peter said was, and this is very important, the concept of westernizing. He wanted to visit Western Europe to learn European ways. Now, whenever we say Europe, or whenever we say Western, we're really talking about Western Europe, kind of this area of Europe. This is Western Europe. So when we hear the word Western, the whole rest of the year, don't think like Western America, like cowboys and Indians and cowboy hats and ropes and stuff. It's Western thinking. All right. So Peter wanted to visit the West because he wanted to modernize his country. He knew that Russia was very much behind the rest of Europe. Okay. So this is just a quick note. I've already told you this. It's in your notes right here. They called Russia the land of the warriors and the serfs. Very backward. They were also cut off geographically from Europe. They were a huge country, but they were really rather isolated. And they had little contact with Western Europe. And they had a different religion. They used what we call the Russian Orthodox Church. They more associated with the Eastern brand of Christianity. They weren't really ever part of like the Roman Catholicism or Roman Christianity that the rest of Europe was. All right. So this goal of westernization, he wanted to change. So what are some of the things he wanted to change? He changed the church. He brought it under state control, reduced the power of the landowners. These were the boyars. And he did this by growing his own army, by growing the government. And this is one of those overall themes for this whole chapter, is the power struggle between the absolute monarch and the land-owning nobles. And in Russia, the land-owning nobles were called boyars. Okay. All right, so there's the army. I just mentioned the army, but he modernized the army. He made it so that people served in the army basically as for life. All right, so a lot of peasants joined the army. Okay, these are just some of what we call the westernizing things that he did in Russia. He introduced the potato. So how did he introduce all this stuff? Well, the first thing he did was he took a trip to Western Europe. And he traveled as the Tsar, but also tried to go incognito where people didn't really know he was a ruler, so that he could really find out stuff. And your book talks a little bit about that here. But he visited the West when he was 24 years old. And he came back, and once he got back to Russia, he said, all right, here's what we're going to do. Some of these things right here. Potatoes, because potatoes can help people grow and increase the population. You feed humans, you're going to get more of them. He started Russia's first newspaper. He raised the status of women. See, when he visited Europe, one of the things he found out was that women and men socialized together. Okay, remember we talked about King Louis XIV. He had that big, huge palace in Versailles. Women and men would eat together. They would dance together. They would attend theater together. So he wanted women to be more... not necessarily equal to men, but have more to do socially with men. Women didn't have to wear stuff wrapped around their head. You see in a lot of Orthodox Islamic countries where women are covered from head to toe. In Russia, it was kind of like that too. So he said women didn't have to do that. And then he also introduced Western fashions to what people were wearing in Russia. He told men to. Some of them, they said, hey, let's shave. Because guys in Europe were shaving their face, shaving their face. Let's do that too. And he also started education. Before he went to Europe, or Western Europe, Russia didn't even have roads. They didn't have a postal system. They barely didn't even have, they didn't have banks and stuff like that. So this was all part of westernizing or modernizing Russia. All right. Now, the one thing that he definitely had to have, and if you look at the map, when Russia first started over here, started around Moscow, you'll notice in 1648, now this is before Peter, they didn't have a real port. Now, we've talked this whole year about how important it is in trade, where you have water to sail a boat, and we talked about that quite a bit. They didn't have a warm water port. So he went over and he had to fight a war against Sweden to get some land on the Baltic Sea. All right, and that's good. So he won a war right here, got some land on the Baltic Sea, and he started to build a new capital called St. Petersburg. Okay, he built St. Petersburg, and it was a swamp, very similar to our Washington, D.C. When we started Washington, D.C., it was a swamp too. But there was like 10,000 or more people that died building his capital. I don't know if we lost that many. I know we didn't lose that many building D.C. But it took several years to build. The serfs were forced at gunpoint to go do the work. But he built this city, and that was his capital. He made the nobles move to St. Petersburg. And I haven't been there, but it's a beautiful place. You see pictures of it even today. People go to St. Petersburg. It's a beautiful place. Now, I've got a big note right here. Even today, Russia wants a warm water port. Russia, here, when it started out, one of its goals was to get a warm water port. Even over here in St. Petersburg, it can be icy in the winter, so you can't trade. Throughout the whole rest of this year, when we talk about Russia, we'll talk about them expanding here first into the Black Sea, more into the Baltic, and really their main goal, they really wanted to get a port down here on the Mediterranean Sea. They never quite got it. Okay? But what are they doing now? What's Putin doing now? He's trying to conquer parts of the Ukraine. He conquered Crimea not too long ago and made it part of Russia, right in the middle of the Black Sea. So this is just a long policy for Russia wanting a warm water port. Okay? All right. Stop it right there.